Good morning, and thank you very much for attending. First, my gratitude to CAMX and the ACMA team for making this featured session possible. There's a bit of a twist to this session today, but first, a little context. I serve as chairman of Infrastructure Ventures, a business I formed in 2017 following my retirement after 35 years of state and federal service, which culminated with the great privilege of serving as President Obama's Federal Highway Administrator. I am Greg Nadeau, and we have a board of advisors that I've counted on to help forge alliances designed to advance our targeted technologies identified by Infrastructure Ventures over the last 5 years. Federal Highway developed and launched Federal Highway's Everyday Counts partnership with states in 2010, still going strong after 12 years. EDC is a state-based model that identifies and deploys proven yet underutilized innovations. I think the use of sustainable, durable, non-corrosive materials in our bridges and structures warrants EDC-level attention and priority-level attention by state DOT bridge programs. I will illustrate with an example from another material sector of the potential market impact this level of focus and collaboration can have a bit later. An example of state DOT's market power. For the last year, I've been particularly focused on developing InfraTalk America, a new multimedia platform dedicated to supporting and accelerating the advancement of targeted technologies in the public infrastructure space, currently with a focus on transportation infrastructure. We do so with the help and support of our sponsors and strategic partners. I serve as publisher of InfraTalk America. We will be recording this session for our Policy Roundtable series, one of several we'll produce this year. We will make this session available to CAMX and the public and work to distribute to state and federal infrastructure policy influencers in support of our mission and in support of ACMA's ongoing outreach and education efforts. Now, with that context, our content development focus for InfraTalk America includes sustainable composite structures. I also want to share that our current sponsor is Advanced Infrastructure Technologies, based in my home state of Maine. I've served on AIT's board of directors for the past 5 years, which has enabled me to work with ACMA as an industry member. I've learned a ton and have experienced firsthand the challenges associated in deploying innovation nationally under the Federal Aid Highway Program from a private sector perspective. And after 35 years in government, it has been illuminating. I'm pleased that AIT Chairman and CEO Brit Svoboda is joining us for our panel discussion to share his experiences with infrastructure agency engagement. I am pleased to be a member of ACMA's Transportation Structures Council, ably chaired by Scott Reeve of Creative Composites Group, who sadly was unable to join us here today. But the TSC is ably represented today by our friend ACMA's own John Busel, who needs no introduction here. TSC has become a center for focusing on a number of policy elements along with advancing specific research projects. A special focus on the state DOTs is essential to cracking the code leading to advancing greater use of FRP composites in bridge building and maintenance and with concrete reinforcement, which significantly extends the life of concrete structures. Under the able leadership of ACMA's President Cindy Squires, we're back in the game at the federal policy level. There continues to be evolving opportunities made possible by the federal bipartisan infrastructure bill's funding. She also understands that the name of the game in the Federal Aid Highway Program is state-level policy engagement. The Bipartisan Infrastructure Bill, or IIJA as we'll refer to it, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, is proving to be what was advertised. There are an array of opportunities for the composite sector throughout IIJA. Joe Fox, a leading industry voice and advocate, is also joining us today on our panel. Joe will focus on the broad array while I focus on one example, perhaps the most challenging and maybe frustrating, bridges. Under the Federal Aid Highway Program, approaching federal funding annually, just the federal share of about $50 billion a year, add the state and federal match, you have well over $100 billion a year, year in and year out. State DOTs are entirely responsible for the determination as to whether a contractor will bid your systems or products under the Federal Aid Highway Program. The program has long been described in law as federally assisted but state administered. The state DOT influence on our county and local transportation infrastructure agencies when it comes to the use of important innovations cannot be overstated. Bridge standards and specifications right at the top of the list. Local bridge owners, our cities, towns, and counties, are chronically underfunded when it comes to bridge maintenance. Any local officials listening are nodding their heads right now. Our objective is to translate these realities to policymakers at the state level to ensure they understand the sustainability, constructability, and life cycle benefits that will be gained if state DOTs prioritize the resources necessary to incorporate FRP composite materials in their bridges and structures. Infrastructure agencies have an obligation to foster marketplace competition under the Federal Aid Highway Program. That's not happening in the bridge market to the extent that it could, based on the current success of many versions of bridge technology. It's also the right thing to do for taxpayers and the environment. So why now? IIJA includes the largest bridge investment since the building of the Interstate Highway System, a bridge formula program of $27.5 billion, and a bridge investment grant program of $12.5 billion. $40 billion in investment in bridges in the next 5 years. The rising costs, limited availability, and historical volatility of steel and other traditional materials is another contributing factor. Increased focus on sustainability, climate change, and resiliency by the federal government and many state DOTs is another. Funding for locally owned off-system bridges. Federal funds can be used for 100% of the cost of repairing and replacing these assets under that program. Finally, the Tribal Transportation Program received upwards of $800 million. So a number of elements within the bridge program have historic and unprecedented funding levels of funding. The composite industry is already making valuable contributions toward expanding knowledge in state DOTs about FRP infrastructure. We must, however, focus on facilitating engagement among state DOTs at both the structural engineering and policy level in order to pick up the pace. I can tell you from experience, when I served as Deputy Commissioner of Maine DOT, the opinion of the bridge engineer is paramount, with good reason. The University of Maine, I used to say to my bridge audiences back when I served as administrator, the last thing I want is a cavalier bridge engineer. But we also expect them to do what they can aggressively to advance innovation in bridge building. The University of Maine's Advanced Structures and Composites Center, led by Dr. Habib Dagher, invented what was then known as the bridge in a backpack. Maine DOT funded the construction of several bridges in the mid-2000s to enable researchers and developers to conduct the necessary testing and monitoring of the new arch composite bridge structure in the ground. It proved to be essential to moving the new technology through the bridge community in Maine, which is now a leader in the nation in composite bridge building. I was in Pittsfield, Maine, when the first bridge of its kind was installed in 2005. The origin of my own personal passion for bridge composite technology. My challenge to public infrastructure policy leadership is to embrace the composite industry's offer to work with your state DOT, with your frontline structural and design engineers, as well as with your consulting engineering community on the opportunities and benefits FRP composites in your structures and concrete reinforcement can bring. I wrote and published the following policy case a couple of years ago, and I think it applies now more than ever. And it goes on to say, advancing the use of materials like fiber-reinforced polymers in our public infrastructure is compelling and urgent, not to mention proven and tested. The use of non-corrosive, resilient, and sustainable materials, practices, and technologies used in the development and construction of our state and local transportation infrastructure should become a policy prerequisite as government and business elevate the battle against climate change. Expanding the use of proven and tested, strong and durable, non-corrosive composites to build our infrastructure is the ultimate in sustainable infrastructure. This isn't aspirational, it's happening today. The promise of composite bridge technology and its potential application to a wide array of bridge sites is an important step in extending the life cycle of bridges, accelerating bridge construction, and substantially reducing or eliminating the cost of bridge maintenance. Huge advantage to local and county governments. Under the Federal Aid Highway Program, the demonstration project has long been an effective tool for state DOTs to demonstrate specific technology in an accelerated manner to advance the state of knowledge for their own departments and other jurisdictions, such as county and local transportation infrastructure owners. The following are three elements that summarize the policy case, and I believe every state DOT CEO in America should take to heart. Infrastructure innovation always requires policy-level leadership combined with the essential engagement of the civil engineering discipline, in this case, the bridge community. Composite bridge technology, in addition to having clear sustainability advantages, will effectively bring clear benefits in value to the public's long-term bridge assets owned and managed by state and local agencies. The presence of these competitive advanced materials in your marketplace meaning the state DOTs, will create more competition to the traditional steel and precast products. Competition is essential to competitive prices in any marketplace. That is why the Federal Aid Highway Program and state procurement policies do and should encourage competition. That's the IV policy case. We're making progress because the cost of steel is high, if you can get it, combined with an historic level of federal bridge funding for states and locals over the life of IIJA. But the progress is painfully slow, and that is in part due to being victims of our own success. True story. A colleague was circulating at a bridge meeting after having presented on his company's technology associated with composite bridge opportunities. A state bridge engineer of some influence expressed that he was impressed and interested in the possibilities. And it was a state that was interested in actually employing other composite applications in their state. But the bridge engineer confessed there was no way they could entertain its use because they were out straight. My friends, that reality is an innovation killer. I think the composites industry has the technology and is prepared to invest in more capacity development as the market grows. These bridge engineers are out straight. He wasn't wrong, which makes it all the more important than ever for the state DOTs to find more efficient ways of opening their programs and markets for a new competitive, resilient, and robust material for their bridges and structures. States are making design decisions on projects right now and just received their second-year allocation under IIJA, another installment of over $5 billion. The industry needs to support DOTs, and state DOTs need to invest in the expertise or process necessary to conduct their state's due process, which is different for every state DOT, which is at best a challenge. I think there's a role for AASHTO's National Transportation Product Evaluation Program, NETPEP, in the industry to collaborate. It can be done, and it can be accelerated. One of my most memorable EDC initiatives, and one of the most impactful, was our first EDC round in 2010. It's called warm mix asphalt. Just recently, I had the privilege of interviewing Dr. Audrey Copeland, the president and CEO of the National Asphalt Paving Association. In 2009, I arrived at Federal Highway from Maine DOT to report for duty as Victor Mendez's deputy administrator. Ended up spearheading EDC, and Audrey was a Federal Highway Materials engineer at the time on the team that was pitching warm mix asphalt. Her leadership potential was pretty clear back then. It became one of my passions because the value proposition was so clear. Asphalt mix that requires less heat and energy to produce, extends the paving season in cold weather states, and can be hauled longer distances. Pretty simple, pretty effective value proposition. In 2010, when Federal Highway with NAPA's and industry support rolled out the initiative, warm mix asphalt represented about 4% of national asphalt production. Warm mix asphalt today is 40%, which is a pretty remarkable growth over that period of time. Dr. Copeland has always given the EDC partnership a lot of credit for that progress. She also said that the reduced greenhouse gas emissions associated with that achievement amounts to about the equivalent of 200,000 cars year in and year out. So the policy objective, the collaboration between Federal Highway, the states, and the industry resulted in that outcome. And it was essential that the industry see the commitment on behalf of the states to advance this technology in order for them to justify investing in the plant and equipment necessary to produce. In some cases, in states across the country, they are utilizing about 80% of their asphalt demand using warm mix asphalt. So state DOTs collectively have significant market power over a program with an annual combined expenditures of well over $100 billion a year, and that's growing. So it can be done. We've launched the hashtag We Can Do Better, and that's our objective, and that's, I think, clearly the objective of ACMA and other composite interests that are out there advocating and promoting the use of composites in structures. It makes sense, and it's timely. So with that, I would like to invite Joe Fox to come up and present the broader array of opportunities presented in IIJA.
Thank you, Greg. It's a pleasure to be here, and let's see if we can advance the slides. There's a picture of everyone. And just to tell you a little bit about me, I am the president of FX Consulting. It's a consulting company for specialty chemicals and materials industry. I spent 40 years in the chemicals industry, most recently with Ashland and Ineos Composites. I retired in 2020, but wanted to stay active in the industry. I've been very involved with ACMA. I'm on numerous CGI committees. I'm an active member of the American Society of Civil Engineers and a member of their Speakers Bureau. And I'm also a co-facilitator of IACME's Infrastructure and Construction Working Group. So I'm going to talk about the bipartisan infrastructure law and opportunities for composites. And I'm going to begin with the ASCE Infrastructure Report Card. This report card is issued every 4 years by the American Society of Civil Engineers. The last one was issued in 2017. What you're seeing here is the 2021 version. What the report card does is give a grade to each of the 17 categories in the blue boxes. And if you look closely at those grades, I think you would agree that this is not the kind of report card that you want your kids to come home with. Okay. There are 2 B grades, there are 4 C grades, and the rest are either D, D minus, or D plus. The overall grade increased from D plus in 2017, but a C minus is still not very good. Many members of Congress are very familiar with the report card, and it definitely has influenced the infrastructure bill. In fact, all 17 categories in the report card received money in the bill. The official name of the infrastructure bill, as Greg pointed out, is IIJA, which stands for Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And I have found that being a member of ASCE, it's a very good source of information about the IIJA. They hold frequent webinars providing information about what's in the infrastructure bill and what kind of funding opportunities are there for infrastructure-related R&D. I'm going to talk a little bit about both. So here's some of the information that they have provided about what's in the infrastructure bill. If you look at the chart, and the y-axis is in billions of dollars, there are two kinds of bars. The gray bars are for money that was renewed under the infrastructure bill, and the blue bars are for new money devoted to infrastructure. And you can see that the new money actually outweighs the gray bars. They also point out that this is the largest investment of its kind in infrastructure in the history of our nation. Here's a little bit more detail about the split. The biggest slice of that chart is for roads and bridges, as Greg has pointed out. The next biggest slice is for energy, environment, and resilience. That's followed by transit up at the top. And then there are three slices on the left-hand side: wastewater and drinking water, broadband, and rail, that all come in between 55 and 65 billion, about 6 to 8% of the funding. This figure shows where the money will be distributed among the various states. Not too surprisingly, the most populous states get the most money, and the smaller states get smaller shares. But all 50 states will receive money from the IIJA. And this last chart shows how the money will be distributed or administered by the different federal departments. And if you look at the bar on the far left, and you read that sentence, you will see that the Department of Transportation will direct more than half of the funding from the IIJA. So very, very useful information about what's in the infrastructure bill. If you look at the overall bill, the money is really divided into two different buckets. The first bucket is money for construction projects to repair or replace existing infrastructure, like bridges, and to create new infrastructure like EV charging stations. And there are hundreds of billions of dollars in that bucket. Again, money for all 17 categories in the infrastructure report card. On the right, you have the second bucket, which is the R&D bucket. And there are tens of billions of dollars in that bucket. So if you look at the two buckets, hundreds of billions, tens of billions. We're talking billions here, not millions. So we're talking about a lot of money. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about each bucket. So as Greg has pointed out, this is really money that's going to all the states. The state DOTs are very much involved, and more than half of the funding will go to roads and bridges. And there is a formula-based approach to give money to each state. Then there is also significant amounts of grant money, and I've given three examples here of DOT grants that are available. There are the Everyday Counts grants, which Greg mentioned. There are the Reconnecting Communities grants, and there are the Protect grants, which are for resilient infrastructure. I just want to emphasize something that Greg said, coming back to the Everyday Counts grants, and that is the phrase, proven but underutilized technologies. I want you to remember that phrase because I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes. And if you go to grants.gov, you can get specific information about each of these grants. There's what's called a NOFO, a Notice of Funding Opportunity, and it provides a lot of detailed information about the criteria for each grant. If you go there, you will find that it is really the state and local DOTs that are eligible for those grants. And you'll also find that sustainability, resiliency, and equity are all very important criteria when you're submitting a grant application. Now let's look at the second bucket, the funding for R&D. And again, tens of billions of dollars are available here. I'm going to highlight two types of programs that are being funded. The first are university technology centers. This is something that the DOT has funded and will continue to fund using the IIJA money to the tune of $100 billion per year. There are 10 centers, each receiving $10 million a year. A good example is the Transportation Infrastructure Durability Center, or TIDC, which is headquartered at the University of Maine and consists of that consortium of universities in New England. Another very interesting new program that is funded by the IIJA are the TRACE centers, and TRACE stands for Transportation Resiliency and Adaptation Centers of Excellence. Over the next 5 years, this program will create 10 regional centers, and it will be funded to the tune of $500 million. And this money has been authorized. The program will likely start in 2023 when the money is appropriated. So, how can the composites community tap into some of this money? Well, the first thing is that we have been, and we need to continue to increase the awareness of composites throughout the infrastructure and construction community. And ACMA has been doing a very good job of doing that. They have educated Congress through their fly-ins to Washington, D.C. They have educated civil engineers through their ACMI Construction Infrastructure Tech Days. And both of those activities are planned for 2023. I mentioned the TIDC at the University of Maine. And in August, John Busel, Ed Pilpel, and I had a chance to talk to the state DOT representatives from all the states in New England. And then very recently, John and Scott Reeve and Tom Olmsted had a chance to present an update on composites to AASHTO, the American Association of State Highway Transportation Officials. What do we tell them? We tell them that there is an extremely good fit between FRP composites and our nation's infrastructure needs today and in the future. And because we're talking primarily to civil engineers, we try to connect FRP composites to the infrastructure report card and to another document that ASC has published called their Future World Vision, which is a vision of what cities of the future will look like. We're trying to talk their own language. So what do we tell them? We tell them about how composites can be used in bridges. We tell them about FRP rebar. We tell them about FRP girders. We tell them about FRP arches, and Brit will talk about both of those in just a few minutes. And going back to the everyday counts grants wording, all of these technologies are proven but underutilized technologies. We tell them about FRP decks and FRP wraps. We tell them how FRP composites can be used in rural bridges. We tell them how FRP composites can be used in pedestrian bridges and for cantilever walkways for pedestrians and bike paths. Again, more examples of proven but underutilized technologies. I also mentioned that resiliency is very important. So we tell them about how FRP composites can be used in seawalls, in dune restoration projects, and to produce hurricane-resistant and fire-resistant utility poles. Again, these are technologies that are proven but underutilized and badly needed based on what has just happened in Florida a couple of weeks ago and what's been happening out west all summer. We tell them about these key attributes of FRP composites, that they are lightweight, easy to install, corrosion resistant, extremely durable, and resilient. And we tell them about the benefits that are a result of those attributes, things like labor savings and lower maintenance costs. And when you add up all of those benefits, you end up with lower life cycle costs. We tell them about the life cycle analysis and life cycle cost analysis of the Halls River Bridge in Florida. This is probably the most comprehensive LCA and LCCA for FRP in an infrastructure application that I have seen. And I could use the rest of the time for this panel just talking about this analysis. But here's the Cliff Notes version. Their LCA showed that carbon dioxide emissions were 26% lower when FRP elements were used in the bridge in place of steel. And their LCCA showed that the net present value of the life cycle cost was 20% lower when FRP was used in place of steel. Those are both good messages to be telling people. And we need more like that. So what are we doing to generate more like that? Well, you've got both ACMA and IACME working on that front. Earlier this year, ACMA announced its Climate Impact Project. And as part of that project, they are planning to update and expand the life cycle inventory for FRP composites prepared by a variety of fabrication methods. That will help with LCAs. And at the same time, the Infrastructure and Construction Working Group within IACME is working on performing benefit cost analyses using the recently issued guidelines from the Department of Transportation for creating BCAs, which is very important in those grant applications. So what you really got is a complementary effort where ACMA is focusing on LCAs and IACME is focusing on LCCAs. And you really do need both to have a stronger case for FRP. So my take-home message that I'll finish with is what I've shown you before. There's an extremely good fit between FRP composites and our nation's infrastructure needs, both today and in the future. FRP composites can help transform some of these C's and D's into A's and B's right now. And to echo what Greg said earlier, we can do better. And to amplify what Greg said, we can do better with composites. That concludes my presentation, and I'll be happy to answer any questions as we proceed through the rest of the panel.
Thank you, Joe. We're going to turn to Brit Svoboda, who is going to share a few minutes of reflections, and then followed by John, who's going to sort of clean up, and then we'd love to get you involved in the conversation. So when that time comes, we've got a microphone here. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the microphone if you can. In the meantime, Brett.
Good morning.
The floor is yours.
Are we on? Yeah. Good morning. I am taking a little different position than all this good information that has been shared up to this point. I'm like pretty much the rest of the people in this room that are in this composite industry. I'm a businessman and entrepreneur, not an engineer, who was enticed back 10 or 12 years ago into recognizing the opportunities in the composite industry, specifically starting with bridges, which much of this conversation today has been about bridges, but it's really truly about composites, composite initiatives, and composite solutions, regardless of which part of the industry we're all involved in. As an entrepreneur, I looked at this and said, who wouldn't buy a bridge that lasts 100, 150 years? Who wouldn't buy a bridge that reduces and eliminates maintenance, sustainable? All the benefits that come with all of us in this industry of composites offering those kind of solutions to our industry. I thought as a businessman, well, gosh, I'll be in and out in 3 years and we'll flip this thing and we'll have changed the world. I found out, like everybody else in this room sitting here today, that it takes passion, conviction, and a determination not to give up in order to change the world. Composites is a situation where we win and lose as we work as a team, and I'm here to just share the the barriers to entry that we all face every day, especially in the public sector world that Greg has done a great job introducing our company into. And that is, every engineer out there that I've visited or spoken to over these 10 or 12 years come out of those meetings saying, oh my God, this is the solution for everything. We need to do this. And then they proudly turn around and do nothing. The barriers to entry are engineers are risk adverse. They're not paid to make changes. In fact, they're paid not to make mistakes. So they're very, very safety oriented, and they don't like to change easily. We as an industry need to continue to work together in a partnership such that we recognize we're not competitors in this room. We're not even in a situation where we sell similar products. A composite win is a composite win. And I'm here to, since we all recognize the barriers to entry to innovation and change, we need as an industry to continue our efforts, double down on our efforts in working together, because regardless of what part of the industry we're in, whether in our case it's bridges, which we have since expanded into composite rebar, composite seawalls, composite utility poles, and smart poles, only to offer more solutions to the public sector and to the private sector. The more we can offer, the more victories we get. So as all of us sitting in this room, the more we work together to promote the idea of everything from the sustainability to all the other advantages and benefits of long-term solutions with composites, we have to celebrate each other's victories. We have to celebrate and participate in changing the mindset of our engineers who sit there and say, this is wonderful, we need to do this, and then choose to do nothing because they're too busy, as Greg pointed out as the former administrator of Federal Highway. It's very discouraging sometimes, but when we get into these kind of groups, I just want to double down on the fact that we continue to work, we continue to brand ourselves as those long-term solutions, and that we recognize the barriers to entry, but as an industry, we take all these benefits and advantages, take advantage of the IIJA and the many things as we're beginning to better document life cycle and life cycle cost analysis. We need to work together more specifically to get to the public sector and the private sector, and again, work towards a celebration of victories and work together to double down on that message to the marketplace. That's all I really wanted to share with you, to the extent that this has been great information for all of us, and I think regardless if you're in bridges or rebar or any other widget that we produce to the market, we're in this together, and we need to support each other and keep all of us passionate about changing the world. It takes time.
Thank you, Brit. John Busel.
I'm going to take a different perspective. I've had the honor and privilege for almost 3 decades to be a part of transformation of our composites industry into a new market called construction and infrastructure. And I've seen a lot of innovation, and I've seen a lot of deployment of products, technologies, successes and failures. So we need to learn from that. One of the things that has been paramount during that time is continual education. And we're always going to need to educate the engineer. That is probably of the highest order, and we continue to do that today. I'll tell you, in the mid-90s, I had to describe what FRP means to a civil engineer. I don't have to do that anymore, so I think we've made some movement. But that movement has been good, and it's also been challenging because now they keep on raising the bar for composites. The thing that we have to keep in mind with the civil engineer, it's all about cost. They can appreciate the performance, but it's still about cost. And I remember doing a presentation in the late 90s, and at the bottom of my presentation, it's cost, cost, cost. So we have to keep that in mind. And that's been a challenge for our industry across the board. We're at a situation right now where engineers need tools to select, design, and specify composites to make it easier for them to deploy our products and our innovations. There's new issues that are arising that we have to keep in mind, and it's characterizing composites with sustainability. That's not anecdotal, that is based on science, that is based on numbers that people can rely on. And how that compares with traditional materials. And we come back to that the competition here is steel, aluminum, concrete, and wood. Oh, by the way, we like concrete because FRP makes concrete better. And a real good case in point is all of the work that I know my personal self has done, as well as many in our composites industry in the American Concrete Institute. So 1 month ago today, 1 month ago and maybe about a week ago, the FRP rebar code was published in the American Concrete Institute. This is a huge deal, and I've said this for the past 20 years, that is the holy grail for composites. Why? Everybody wants to know how to design composites, and we've done that. We've had 3 iterations of a design guideline. We have over 20 different standards that were developed over the past 20 years. Over the past 4 years, we were developing the FRP rebar code. That FRP rebar code is very much a model and mimics ACI 318, which is the concrete building code. So this building that is built today is built with the ACI 318 code. The FRP is exactly like that code, except we swap out steel and put in FRP. So now we have a reliable document that's been codified that civil engineers can go to and point to and start designing. So we're going to start seeing some major initiatives going forward. So it's interesting that it's coinciding with the IIJA. And what's even more impactful in all of this is that FRP rebar has also been introduced with not only with the rebar code and associated test methods into the International Building Code. And in a hearing 3 weeks ago, a public hearing, the building officials voted in favor of including as a provision in the 2024 International Building Code to include FRP rebar. So now we're going to see FRP rebar codified in buildings. So again, you're providing the tools for civil engineers to point to and specify to. The point was brought up with everyday counts, and it's been very again, as a privilege to participate in 6 or 7 different regional meetings with the Everyday Counts program. And it was always nice to be included with steel, concrete, and composites. Of course, with steel and concrete, they didn't have to do too much education. With composites, I had to do a lot of education. But again, it's all about education. Our ACMA committees, specifically our Transportation Structures Council and our FRP Rebar Manufacturers Council, have dedicated the past 20 years to education, marketing, and standards development. It has taken a village, and I go back to the FRP Rebar Code because it wasn't all about composites. It wasn't all about the composites industry. It took the academics, the end users, the consultants, as well as our composites industry to deliver this. So we have to keep in mind that it takes a village to move a mountain. But we've been moving the mountains. Now we need to take advantage of all of the successes that are out there. And oh, by the way, there's probably nearly 1,000 bridges out there today that have FRP rebar, have either FRP rebar, decks, piling, or associated members on them. And it doesn't include the over 10,000 bridges out there that have composites to structurally strengthen them. Yet we still seem to be a forgotten material with the customer. So again, I go back to the competition is steel, aluminum, and wood, but we like concrete and we make concrete better. So those are my remarks.
Well said, John. Thank you very much. And John already has a pretty amazing legacy in our industry in advancing these issues to those decision makers we need to impress, and obviously has a lot more to offer as we really engage with infrastructure owners at what I think is a turning point. I think there's a receptivity that just wasn't there before, and a lot of that has to do with the work of people like John Busel and ACMA and Joe, who has become a significant thought leader in our industry. And Brit has lived it day in, day out for over a decade. It's a tough business. The bridge business is tough to begin with. It's tougher when you're trying to advance new and exciting innovation. But before we go on and continue this discussion, I do want to see if there's anyone in the audience that would like to offer a thought or a question to our panel. And if you would like to do so, please use the microphone, which is located on this aisle right here. And if not, we're just going to continue our conversation. But please, does anyone like to get up? The first one is always the hardest. We have a volunteer.
So my question is, does the infrastructure bill include money for research into recycling of composites or mandate an end-of-life plan, like how it's going to be reused or
Got it.
something like that?
I'm not familiar with specific resources for that particular purpose, but John and Joe might have better information.
So you've heard me mention IACME several times, and there is a very active program within IACME to look at the recycling of composite materials. A lot of activity right now is focused on recycling of wind turbine blades at their end of life, but it can apply to other types of composites as well. There's a considerable amount of work being done at Oak Ridge National Lab. And John, you may want to talk. ACMA has funded projects on recycling and has held conferences on recycling.
So not so much about that. For the bridge engineer, they're not necessarily asking the question of how things are going to be recycled yet. There is a checklist. They'd like to know it can be done. How exactly it's going to be done, they're not asking those detailed questions right now. From other aspects, it's starting to creep, that question is starting to creep out and gives us time as an industry to prepare what those answers are. So we're currently developing a design standard, take that back, a specification standard for cross arms used in the electrical utility industry. And new to that standard that we haven't done in previous ACMA standards is including sustainability. And how do you define sustainability to an electrical utility engineer that, for the most part, has not really cared about how they even recycled wood that came out of electrical infrastructure? So there's not a single answer that is for everybody. It depends on the market, depends on the products, it depends on the application. But that's not stopping their decision-making for specifying composites today. Again, it always goes about cost.
Just very recently, the first awards under the discretionary bridge grant program were announced. This is part of the BIL. You know, you talked about the formula funds, which are allocated to the state based on formulas, but there's also a discretionary bridge grant program where Federal Highway Administration receives applications and then awards money for different projects. One of the criteria which this industry deserves some credit for being in the BIL, one of the criteria for those discretionary bridge grants is use of innovative materials. So how should this industry be working with the state DOTs that are going to apply for those bridge grants to get them to use innovative materials in the projects for which they're applying for grants, and to highlight that in their applications so that they can increase the chance that they're going to be awarded grants under the bridge grant program?
First of all, there's the education part, there's the awareness part, making them aware of what's available. Then we can also help them with supply chains, making sure, because they're very concerned about whether they're going to be able to get these materials consistently. And so we can help them say that there's an adequate supply chain, you'll get the quantities that you need. And then I mentioned the benefit cost analysis and how IACME is trying to help state DOTs work through those BCAs with composites because they're used to doing them with steel and concrete.
You know, I wish the answer was all that simple, because not all states have the same business plan. It's a 50-state plan out there. What motivates Ohio does not motivate Florida DOT. They have different criteria. They have a different business model. And quite frankly, they have prejudices with materials and things that they feel comfortable in working with. We were part of a number of different meetings over the past couple of months, and it's interesting to hear the viewpoint of chief bridge engineers from various states that say, yeah, we like rebar, we don't want decks. Or, oh, we love girders, but we're not going to touch rebar. You're kidding me? So it varies.
I'll just add one other thing. I mentioned the ACMA fly-ins, and I distinctly remember when we were in the office of Connor Lamb, who's a representative from Western Pennsylvania, represents a lot of the Pittsburgh area. And, you know, we're pitching composites. And he was very attentive, he was listening a lot, but he goes, you realize that I'm the representative for the Steel City. Tough pitch, tough sell.
So the recipients of those grants are going to go ahead and plan infrastructure projects, and then a year or 2 years from now are going to be back to apply for construction grants. So we know who these organizations are. I don't care what the 50 states are. I've got 12 or 15 DOTs that are going to go after construction grants under the discretionary program. And we know that use of non-traditional materials is one of the things that Federal Highway Administration is supposed to consider. What are we doing to communicate specifically with the people at the state DOTs who are working on those planning activities for which they now have grants, so that when they apply for their construction grants, it seems we work hard, ACMA worked hard at creating this opportunity for us to find the state DOTs that are interested in these grants for which non-traditional materials are going to be a plus. So we've done that now. We know who they are. What are we doing about that to take advantage of that opportunity? Have we gone on? I mean, read the Federal Register notice last week. It gives you the 12 or 15, what they're planning for, how much money they got, and it's there. That's like a qualified customer list, right? Yep. Are we using it as such? Yeah. Right?
Former Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, is credited with saying all politics is local. And I think we can take that overall philosophy to heart when we're trying to impress our colleagues in state and local infrastructure agencies the utility, the benefits of composites in their structures. I say all politics is local because it goes back to what I was saying earlier. You may have missed that, but the focus is on states because the state DOT is the biggest influencer of all infrastructure agencies in the highway and bridge sector. So we need to focus at the state level in terms of policy and engineering. The extent to which we can sort of focus on a subset of the entire community of 52 state infrastructure agencies, that is always helpful. So I think it's a great suggestion that we find evidence of where state DOTs are engaged in a process to make those evaluations. I think a lot of credit for the work that was done to incorporate that language in IIJA. It is not only federal policy from the standpoint of that bill, but it is obviously now federal policy when it comes to the administration of those programs. So, great suggestion. I don't know if John or someone wants to talk about what specifics might be occurring or may occur, but I think it's important that we focus on states and engage with them on topics like that.
So I think part of the answer here is those manufacturers that make products need to step up their game. They need to engage the respective DOTs and the leadership within their states to make themselves aware what they do, what they provide. Coordination from our ACMA could certainly help in that. Some of them are already doing that. Not all of them are doing that, but there's the opportunity. It still comes back down to there are some states that have prejudices of this is what we do in our state and this is what we don't do in our state. So they also look at innovative materials as being, high strength concrete. So it's a matter of their interpretation of innovative. So it's not always about FRP too. That's what we have to compete with.
Brit, you've probably spoken to every DOT in the country by now. Any thoughts?
Well, I guess the thoughts that I have right now, I think that was a great question for all of us in this industry. And I will personally claim right now I'm as guilty as many of us others in this room right now, not better understanding the discretionary portions and how we're responsible. And that's why I made the comment. We're out there trying to educate the public sector as well as the private sector, and yet these opportunities come along, and I'm not sure I totally understand. And I've got the advantage of a Greg Nadeau being on my board, and I'm not sure I understand the full policy opportunities that are implicit in this program right now. And so we all have got to step up, and I'll be the first to say I'm going to have to get more involved. I need to be more involved with ACMA and our own trade organizations. I need to be more active with my compadres in this industry, and I'm as guilty as any. So this has been an awareness for me as well, to be honest with you. A great question, and I wish I could give you an answer. I don't have it because I have been remiss in studying it closer than I should. But we need to do a better job as an industry. We all need to get involved and have these answers and have a focused objectives on how we're going to take advantage of these opportunities. I went to Congress a couple of times with our key representatives from our region, and we talked about, can we get some kind of an adaptive bill, and went to Greg at that time too when he was in Federal Highway and said, look, you guys give out $48 billion a year. Can't we earmark somehow, earmark wasn't the right word, but how can we say 1% of all the funding will go towards innovation? Any state or county municipality that uses an innovation gets rewarded. We'll pay not the 50% or the 80%, unmatched funds, 100%. We started those things. We all were active in these kind of things. How do we take that to the next level and be consistent and be continuous and follow through on those things? So I'm just throwing that out as an idea we need to do a better job on.
Sure. We're at the top of the hour, so I'm going to let Joe's comment sort of close us out.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, and again, answering John's question and echoing something that John said earlier, in terms of getting the message out to the state DOTs, there are opportunities where multiple DOTs are in the same room. You've got the TIDC where we had all the New England DOTs represented. I don't know how many DOTs were at that AASHTO council that 10. Okay, so sometimes you get multiple DOTs. But as John has pointed out, there are 50 states, 50 DOTs, and what we're seeing is that companies are reaching out to the DOTs in their state. So for example, I live in Ohio. The Ohio DOT has become an adopter. They've been sold on FRP rebar. Where? Northwest Ohio. Who's there? Owens Corning is headquartered in Northwest Ohio, and they're the biggest composite rebar manufacturer. So they reached out with something that they had. Maine's another good example. AIT is there, the University of Maine is there, and Maine has become a user of the FRP arches, of the FRP girders. Tennessee is an example where there's rural bridges, and there's been one rural bridge. Well, they're trying to work with the Tennessee DOT to do more rural bridges. So it really does become state by state specific.
And with that, I just want to reiterate, there isn't better encouragement from this panel today than to engage at the state level with your institutions. There's a lot of work that's being done, a lot of clarification that's been developed over the years as to the benefits and opportunities that our technology brings to the infrastructure world. But there's nothing more impactful than what Joe just said, a local company working with their institutions, providing that insight and education, and creating those opportunities for your business in your states. So again, thank you all for coming, and thanks to our panelists. It was a very enlightening discussion for me, and please enjoy the rest of CAMX. Thank you.